Welcome back to Think Outside the Board, everyone. I already have all the games picked out for the August Game of the Month video since we're out of August, but you'll probably see that hitting the channel somewhere in mid-September. And then in the very beginning of October, I'll publish the September video. And from then on, each month's Games of the Month video should be published during that first week of the following month. So it'll be as fresh as it can be in terms of me reporting on my plays from that previous month. So all that means really is that within the next 4 to 5 weeks, you're going to get 3 of these videos, which is pretty cool. I have a lot of great games to talk about. Embarcadero is the game of the month this month. However, if you've watched these videos from me before, you know that I have 3 categories. And I've kind of waffled a little bit on the nomenclature for what I'm calling the later versions of the game, just because they're not reprint. A reprint often means that they just ran out of copies of the game, so they went and they did a new printing and made new copies. But what I'm talking about in that category is essentially a new version of the game, a later edition. And so I think I have finally settled on what to call those games. And it's not really a board game terminology, it's more like movies. But I think it's going to be the simplest way to describe these moving forward. So from now on, we're just going to call these games remakes. So remake is one category. Another category is games that are older than 6 months. And I do that just so that as I'm playing games that aren't really new, hot off the presses, I can still talk about games that are a little bit older and not sort of be confined to just the new stuff. So that'll be the second category. And then the third category is sort of the overall game of the month, and that is chosen from amongst newer games. And this month, that's going to be Embarcadero. So we'll talk about Embarcadero, but we're going to do that at the end of the video. First up, in our first category today, which is remakes, I'm going to be talking about Chronicles of Crime 1400. Now, if you bought this game at retail, you might have a box that looks like this. You might also have a box that looks like this if you pledged the Kickstarter, but you only pledged it for part of the Kickstarter. So back when they Kickstarted this, about a year or 2 ago, they had 4 games that they were doing all at once. So they had Chronicles of Crime 1400, 1900, 2400, and Chronicles of Time. And the idea behind these games is that in all 4 games, you are playing different members of a crime-solving family over different time periods, over different generations. So there's one that's set in 1400. It has kind of an Assassin's Creed feel to it. There's a game set in 1900, which is kind of taking place more in Victorian England. There's going to be a game set in 2400, which is sort of a futuristic cyberpunky game. And then the 4th game, Chronicles of Time, is going to have cases from all 3 time periods. So I think Chronicles of Time was really the impetus in this Kickstarter to get all of it at once, because you need to have each of the other 3 games to be able to play Chronicles of Time. It uses the components from all the other 3 games. So by having that sort of connector game in the Kickstarter, it made good sense for backers to back all of the games. Right? It was an additional incentive. And when the Kickstarter delivered, the only game that was available to play on the app was 1400. Now, about a month or 2 ago, the app went live for Chronicles of Crime 1900. So, people who had backed the Kickstarter and already had the game weren't able to play it until then. And they're kind of continuing to work on the app for all of the later games. 2400 should be out before the end of the year, and then I'm not sure when Chronicles of Time is going to go live, probably the first quarter of 2022. So anyway, if you bought this at retail, you're probably just getting the box, this one game. But if you back the Kickstarter and you kind of backed all of the stuff, then you are going to have this game. And the only unfortunate thing here about the way that they did this, which is if you backed this Kickstarter for everything like I did, you still got all of the boxes for the smaller games. So there's a lot of waste involved with that, but I think the publishers still thought it was a better idea rather than kind of doing separate printings and having to deal with the shipping for this separately. But I think there needs to be a better way to do this in the future, so they're not just shipping all of these empty boxes to people who don't need them because they have this. Anyway, that's kind of besides the point, but that's one of my few small quibbles about Chronicles of Crime. Now, I am right now kind of playing through 1900. I'm looking forward to 2400 when it comes out, but I have completed 1400. So I have finished all the cases at 100%, and that means that you're going to see a review on 1400 from me very, very soon. I did do a sort of first impressions video on 1400 when I first got it. I've decided I'm not going to do that for the rest of the games in the series. I'm just going to play them, and then when I finish them, do a full teach and review. So I do have a first impressions out on this already. You can go and look at it if you'd like to. If not, just know that a full teach and review will be coming from me in just a few days for this. Now, the reason that this is considered a remake, and every single game that's a part of this box is essentially going to be a remake in my mind, because there is a Chronicles of Crime base game out there. So they've already made the game in general. They've already kind of created a system for the game, and now they're just going and they're duplicating it with new cases. And in this case, they threw in some additional mechanics in each game, and they decided to set them in different time periods just to give you more variability in the games and how they play, and just to make it a little different and give it some more variability from the base game and the base game's expansions. So I haven't actually played the base game, and I can't speak to the base game, but I can tell you Chronicles of Crime 1400 is made up of 5 different cases. One is a tutorial, so it's not that difficult. And then as you play through the other 4 cases, each of them has more complexity and the cases get harder. So what that means and how that increasing complexity is achieved in this game is you are essentially going around a world. There are different location boards. So every time you go to a different location, you're going to use your phone and you're going to have to scan in the QR code for that location. And then you can talk to other people in that location. You can look at objects. And that's all done with QR code scanning, which means that this game is very app dependent, and you need something that also has a camera in it. So if you're playing on some kind of an iPad and it has, internet connectivity, but it doesn't have the ability to scan something, you're still not going to be able to play the game. So phones work really well. You can use your phone technology to scan the codes. And obviously you're going to need internet connectivity as well. So I know for some people that's just a hard line in the sand. They want their board games to be purely analog, and they don't want any kind of technology or a computer element attached with it. So fair enough. If you feel that way, then you won't like this game. This game also features a series of cases, which means that once you solve each case, you can't replay it. Because the cases aren't random, they are scripted, which means that the storyline, the clues, the answers, everything is going to be the same every time you play it. And in that sense, it's going to be a lot like an Exit the Game, or the Unlocked series, or even the Time Stories games. Now, like the Time Stories games, as you play through it, you may not solve the case on your first go-through. Or you may solve the case, but there may be little things that you don't completely finish. There may be kind of little side stories or little clues that you don't fully explore. So even in some cases, once you've solved the case, you may want to go back and replay it just so that you can 100% everything and feel like you've gotten your full usage of the game. But once you do that, you will still reach a point where you've seen everything and the game is done. And I will say that for me, I would average about, let's say, 2 or 3 plays per case. And I think usually when you play a case, it's going to take you about 2 hours to play it. And then on subsequent plays, it may take you an hour because you're already going to know where certain things are, who to ask certain questions to, and you can almost kind of speed through it. So if we just take this as kind of an estimate for gameplay, we figure 5 cases, 2 hours per case, plus 2 more replays, maybe an hour each. So let's say 4 to 5 hours per case. And there's 5 cases in the game. So we're talking probably about 20 to 25 hours just to completely run this game into the ground. So I guess whether or not you think there's enough play value in this game will depend on that. Is 20 to 25 hours of a game that features solvable cases enough for you. Now, there are other games out there like this as well. Portal Games has their own series called Detective, a Modern Crime board game. And they've had some expansions for that, just as Chronicles of Crime has had expansions. And they've done some kind of thematic sequels as well. There's a game right now called The Vienna Connection, which is kind of based on their series. They also have a season. So there's another detective game that's kind of a season, as if it's a TV show. So those are both games that have kind of spawned off of the detective game. And now they're also doing a Dune Imperium themed version of Detective Modern Crime board game. So all those games are from Portal Games. There's also a game called Detective City of Angels that has a few expansions. That one's a little bit different because you can play it solo, but it's more designed to be played by a group, with one character taking on the role as kind of a dungeon master who then gives clues to the detective players and can screw around a little bit with them. So that game is a little bit different in the way that it plays, but it still has scripted cases with specific answers, to the point that once you play a case once, you can't really play it again because you'll know all the answers. There's also a much simpler kind of card game detective game called Deadline. And in that game, every case comes with its own deck of cards, and it's purely kind of card-based. But again, it still falls into that same group of games where there is a set case with a script to it and set answers. Now, amongst all of those games, I think Chronicles of Crime 1400 holds up really, really well. It's very, very well written, and the art is fantastic for it. There's a handful of artists on this game, and they've all done a good job. The art just looks very thematic. It's sort of stylized and natural at the same time. So, I mean, it doesn't look completely natural. It's kind of cartoony, but it still has that sense of that time period, very much so. And that's true of the location boards and other art in the game. I have played 1900 a bunch, and the art is different for 1900, and I think the way they've kind of changed the art from time period to time period is very well done and suits each time period very well. I'll also say that just the writing for the game is very, very good. The cases make sense as you solve them, like as you find out information. Nothing feels too kind of obtuse, but things aren't necessarily too easy to figure out either. I think they found a very, very good kind of middle ground in terms of presenting a case without making it too easy, but not making it so obtuse that it's kind of just difficult for difficulty's sake. Now, the difficulty does ramp up. So in any of the Chronicles of Crime game, the easiest case is obviously going to be the tutorial, and they'll kind of show you how the game works, the scanning, the QR codes, all that kind of thing. And then as you get into the cases, the later cases that get harder, there'll be things like certain objects or certain conversations that you shouldn't show to a person or shouldn't have with someone. Sometimes if one person gives you certain information or maybe shows you something, and then you go and you repeat that information to somebody else or show them that item, you might be betraying that first person's confidence. So if you go back to talk to that person later, they may not be willing to talk to you anymore. So that's one way that the game, as the complexity level of the cases increases, will throw things in that can kind of roadblock your progress. They may also do things where you have to be in a certain place at a certain time. And if you miss that, you just won't be able to find out that information. Or, there may be a certain order of certain events you kind of need to process through, and you need to figure out what that is. Chronicles of Crime never feels as punishing to me as the Time Stories series. That series, specifically the older white version with all the white boxes, that often you had to replay it quite a bit and kind of stumble in the dark sometimes to figure out what's going on and what the order to do things is. Chronicles of Crime 1400, at least in my mind, it always makes sense. So you might need to figure out more things, go to different locations, ask people different questions. But once you've kind of, figured out everything and you look back at it, everything seems to make sense, at least to me. And I think that in that sense, the writing in the game and the design of the puzzles And how that information is presented to the players, I think is pretty top notch. Now, I haven't totally decided on my score for this game. I just need to sit down and think about it a little bit more. But it's probably going to be maybe a 7.5 or an 8. And the reason it's not higher, for me, is just the lack of replayability. So, I mean, it would be possible to make a game like this where it's randomized. And in that case, it would be, theoretically replayable forever. But this game is not that. So while I think the art is gorgeous and beautiful, and I think the game is well designed, it is a shorter game. There is a limit to it. So for me, that lack of replayability dings it down a little bit from, the starting possibly perfect score of a 10 out of 10. So I think we're sitting there at a 7.5 to an 8. I have read that the cases in 1400 are easier than the cases in the base game. And I've also read that those cases in the base game are sometimes maybe unintentionally hard, maybe not hard because they're supposed to be hard, but just hard in the way that they're designed. And I think that knowing that, they may have done a better job with the kind of structure of the design as they've gone on and created more and more games. So, now that they're getting to 1400, they've done the base game, they've done some expansions. I think they're just kind of honing in on how they create the series and getting better and better at it. I do know that there are some elements in 1400 that are not in the other game. One of those is a series of vision cards. And at the start of any case, you will have a certain number of these cards and you'll pull them out and you'll kind of lay them out. And your character is supposed to be some kind of a seer a little bit. So he has these visions of things that are related to the case. And oftentimes it will show you little scenes of various characters that are related to the case and sometimes pivotal moments in the case, actions that have happened. And so when you're playing that case for the first time and you are exploring the case and exploring the various characters, you can use those vision cards as kind of a roadmap. Like, oh, I'm pretty sure this character is not any good because he's seen over here holding a knife in his hand with like blood on him. So I think maybe he did something to someone in the game. And you can kind of use those different cards. Usually there's like 4 or 5 of them as a kind of connect the dots. So once you think that you understand what each of those scenes is about and you kind of understand how they're connected, you probably understand the case and its solution. And I like that. I think especially for a first entry in this new version of the series, having that kind of little roadmap is really, really helpful. Now, in general in the game, you'll be using 3 decks of cards in addition to that vision deck. There'll be a set of cards of people. There'll be a set of cards of items, very specific items that you'll need to find to get those cards. And generally there aren't more than a few of those used in any one case. They're very kind of specific. And then you'll have another deck of items that instead of having pictures on them are all words. And those are meant to be very interchangeable. Those kind of word item cards will be used throughout all of the different cases. And a lot of times you'll go to a crime scene. You'll take your phone and there's 3 different ways for you to explore a crime scene. One of them involves glasses that you can get as an add-on, which will allow you to see the crime scene in kind of more 3-dimensionality. And another one is just, holding up your phone. And you'll move your phone around, you're looking at it like this, and you'll see the whole room as if you're in it. And so you'll be looking for clues. And if you play this not alone, you can have one player kind of shouting out the things that they're seeing, like scrolls, bottles, door, curtain, body, footprints. And the other players can be going through these decks of words and pulling out the cards that match or best match with what you're saying. And then when you're done exploring the scene, you're going to scan in all of those QR codes from those cards, and you'll see which of those items are actually relevant to the case. So you've got those cards, and then you've got these location boards. So occasionally in any case, you'll probably explore 1 or 2 crime scenes. You'll be dealing with the objects that you're finding, the objects of interest, and you'll be talking to different people. and you're just kind of walking around all these locations and trying to solve the case. It really doesn't need more than one player. In fact, I think if you're playing this with 3 or 4 players, it's not that great of an experience because only one person is really kind of interacting with the phone at a time, so everyone kind of has to just sit there, and there's a lot of wasted time. I do think, though, it plays pretty well at 2, because that way you have another person to kind of bounce ideas off, and when you are exploring a crime scene, that other person can kind of be helping you in going through that deck. So I think it works really well with 2. I think it also works really well solo. 3 and 4, I just don't know, because unless people just kind of want to sit there and have a group experience where those 3rd and 4th players, and that can rotate around at any time, but they're essentially just kind of going to be a cheerleader at that point. I think the player count for this really is ideal in the 1 to 2 range. So I really like this game. The one caveat I have about this, as I've said, is the limited replayability and the fact that they are scripted cases. But if you know that and accept that, you're good to go. Just look for the MSRP, look for it on sale, pick it up, play the cases, enjoy yourself, and then either resell it or gift it to a friend. But it's a really, really solid entry in the series from what I know. This also gets a lot of comparisons to the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective series, but in those games, which are quite a bit older, all of the work that you're doing is with kind of books and booklets and map books and things like that. So you're literally just kind of looking through all these resources to try to figure things out. The Chronicles of Crime series takes that consulting detective game and just updates it to current day using modern technology and allowing players to have a more interactive experience where they're using their phones to do things and instead of just looking through books and notebooks and things like that. Now, I'm not someone who really loves apps in my games. I think I prefer to have the games not tied to electronics, but I am willing to take it on a case-by-case basis. And I do have several games that are dependent on apps that I really, really do enjoy and I think are genuinely worth having, even if at some point in the future, 10, 20, 30 years, that app dependency goes away and the game is no longer relevant. Nothing lasts forever. So I do think that in some cases, I don't mind the app technology. And I think that in this case, it does a really, really good job of making that investigative process more interactive. So while I do understand some people's hesitancy to kind of deal with the apps, I think I prefer the experience of, scanning things and having this kind of interactive experience with the case and hopefully maybe with one other player rather than just sitting with a bunch of books and kind of paging through them. That's just not as fun as an experience. So if you don't mind the technology and you don't mind the limited replayability, I think this is one of the best kind of investigative games out there, at least among the ones that I've played. And it's a great game. You should check it out. So remember, though, that there is also 1900 available for purchase right now. And I think that in my plays of it, I'm already preferring 1900 to 1400, even though I really like 1400. And I think because of the cyberpunk theme, I'm actually looking forward to 2400 the most. And then on top of that, we've got the Chronicles of Time game that, kind of cycles between all 3. So there's lots of good stuff with this series. And if you really do like this game, there's other places to go from there. You can get the kind of other sequels in the series, or you can go and look at the base game, or you can go and look at Detective: A Modern Crime board game, which is very similar by another publisher, but is also supposed to be very good. But as for 1400 by itself, it's a really good game. I've really enjoyed my time with it. I am now done completely with this game. Look for my teach and review soon, and hopefully you will enjoy this game as much as I did. That now brings us to the non-new game section. And as I said at the top, that doesn't necessarily mean games that are 20 years old or anything like that. It just means games that aren't brand new. And I'm going to talk to you about 2 games today. The first is Forgotten Waters. Now, I really enjoyed playing Forgotten Waters, but it's the runner-up this month. And I think I kind of disqualified it in my own mind from being the winner. And the reason is we only played the tutorial and we didn't even finish the tutorial completely. So if you have been watching a lot of my videos, you know that I am planning on eventually launching a Twitch channel, and I'm shooting for hopefully before the end of the year. And so Forgotten Waters is something that I think would be great to play on the Twitch channel. It's just a lot of fun. It is a sort of storytelling game where you're going through, you're making different choices, and then based on that, different things happen, and you need to react to that as a team. This game reminds me a lot of Sleeping Gods, actually, but it is a much lighter, simpler, kind of more standalone version of that game. Now, I love Sleeping Gods. Right now, Sleeping Gods is my #1 game of this year. But Sleeping Gods is a big, massive game. And it's a game that is designed, like a lot of video games, for you to play a campaign. And once you finish that campaign, you won't even have finished everything in the game. So you're going to need to play multiple campaigns to really kind of see everything, to complete all of the storylines in Sleeping Gods. It feels to me like a video game where if you want to platinum it, you need to play through it several different times and kind of do different things every time. And it is a massive game. It takes up a lot of table space. So there are some barriers to entry with it. This is not as massive a game. It doesn't take as much table space. And it's not a game where when you're in the middle of a campaign, you're going to feel like you can't put it away. There are ways to put this game away and come back to it that are kind of more simpler than the Sleeping Gods version of throwing everything into a million different plastic bags and just kind of figuring it out. When you have a huge campaign game on your table, you don't want to just throw everything in plastic bags, throw 100 different plastic bags into a box, and then just figure it out when you're resetting it up. Forgotten Waters is a lot simpler. The adventures are also kind of more standalone because when you do a scenario in Forgotten Waters, you're just playing that scenario. Scenarios aren't necessarily quick. They may take 3 or 4 hours, but when you're done with that scenario, you're done with it. You can put the game away, you can move on, and then later you can come back and play another scenario. Now, Forgotten Waters and Sleeping Gods do something else similar, which is that in Sleeping Gods, you have 7 different characters that you're going to be playing. And no matter the number of players, you still need to be playing those 7 characters, which means if you're playing like a 2-player game, one player has to control 4 characters and the other player has to control 3 characters. Or actually, I think they let you do 3 and 3 and then you kind of control the captain together. I may be wrong. It may actually be 9 characters in Sleeping Gods, so it might be 4 and 4, and then you're working together to control the captain. So for some gamers, that could be a bit much. You know, not every gamer wants to kind of be quadruple handing a game and playing 4 different characters. It may be too much for some gamers to constantly be keeping track of. So Forgotten Waters has something similar. You're not playing 7 different characters, but you do have 7 different game mechanisms that you need to be tracking. So, for instance, in our game that we were playing, we had 3 people playing, which means 2 of the players had to each take care of 2 different mechanisms, and 1 player had to take care of 3 different mechanisms. But I find that those mechanisms are often just tracking systems, you know, kind of moving a token on a tracker to know how much crew you have or kind of how much unrest you have. It's not a lot going on. So I think if you are playing Forgotten Waters with 2 people or even solo, yes, you do have to track 7 different things, but it doesn't feel like the same amount of bookkeeping or upkeeping that, say, Sleeping Gods does. Now, the art in here is great. It's just cartoony, it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of cheeky. It has a sense of humor to the art, and that sense of humor is also in the writing of the game. It can be silly at times, it's just very fun. And I think in that sense, it's also a kid-friendly game to some degree. It has a humor that seems to fall more in line with like the Monkey Island games or something like that, and it's not like doom and gloom. So I think this is a game that you can also play with kids and family and stuff like that. Now, I really, really liked Forgotten Waters. A part of me just wants to play through this right now and see all that it has to offer, and at least play all of the scenarios one time each. But I also really want to save it for the Twitch channel, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play everything through for the first time on that Twitch channel. So I like the game a lot. I need to play it more probably to give it a definitive score. This is probably going to be in the 8s to me. And by the time I finish playing it, I'll certainly have a final score, but I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the 8 to 9 range, just depending on how the scenarios and the writing are. I probably should also mention that this game is published by Plaid Hat Games. It's a part of their Crossroads series, which people may know games like Dead of Winter, and then there was another game that didn't do as well called Gen 7. And all of these games are part of their Crossroads series, where they use a Crossroads deck of cards that's going to basically put events of some kind in the game and just mix things up and add some randomization to the game. So Forgotten Waters does that, but I think even more than that, the game is very much more defined as one of these storybook storytelling games. And Sleeping Gods is definitely a part of that, but Sleeping Gods is going to be on the kind of most complex side with the most components, and it's a huge table hog. But you've also got games like Adventure Tactics, Damien's Tower, Atlas, The Dragon Road, and both of those games have had Kickstarters recently where they're adding on sequel games. So I think between all 4 of those games, as well as some of the earlier Ryan Laukat games like Above and Below, Near and Far, and he's got another game coming out too called Now or Never that's going to be launched probably by the end of this year. All of these games use a booklet that you're kind of going through and you're flipping pages around as you advance in your adventure, and you're doing a lot of exploring and discovering and things like that. And then usually there's combat and you're trying to acquire items and things like that, but it's very, very storytelling based and exploration based. And this game is it's pure fun in a box. It really is. And because of the way that it's designed, I think it can appeal to most gamers and most ages. Although parents should probably make their own decisions regarding whether the game is right for their kids. But in general, I think it's a pretty good, solid, safe choice. So, Forgotten Waters. That was the runner-up for Best Non-New Game. The winner is this game, which is totally crazy. This is Cosmic Frog. Now, just look at the art on this. It looks like something you might see in like a blacklight poster from the 70s. And I want to show you the inside of this because this is pretty cool for a retail game. So you'll notice inside this box, you've got minis. So it is an area control game, and you do have these frogs that you're going to be playing with. And there's also a neoprene mat in with the retail version of the game. So there is no regular board, there's simply a neoprene mat. And this whole package here, the tiles, there's some very chunky tiles that you're going to be putting out on this board, and everything else, the miniatures with the little, the different colored bases. This is just a very well put together package. Now the game itself is kind of crazy. Players are essentially these weird cosmic frog beings, and they are in some part of the universe where they're on this kind of landmass, and they're jumping around on the landmass trying to consume pieces of it and fighting other frogs. And you can do some pretty weird things in this game. You can kick a frog off of this extra dimensional landmass. And if you kick them hard enough, you can kick them into other dimensions, which they then have to kind of return from. Not only that, when you kick them, if they have land in their gullet that they're storing, and this is how the game is won, so you want to kind of accumulate this land. And as you do, you will temporarily store it in your frog gullet, and then eventually you will kind of go into this extra kind of dimensional space, and you'll be able to transfer it over into your personal vault. And in that vault, you're going to be doing things like creating essentially little sandwiches of landmass where you've got different levels of landmass. And then you're going to be creating kind of lines in your vault of all the same types of landmass. And you'll score points at the end of the game for kind of how you do that. But there's a mechanic in this game where when you kick another frog into another dimension, they will literally, as they're being kind of kicked backwards, all of that land that they have in their gullet will fly backwards, right? Physics, right? I mean, you kick someone backwards and they go backwards, the stuff in them is going to kind of remain where it is as they fly backwards into space. Now your frog is going to eat that land that has been ejected out of them when you've kicked them into another dimension. And I am not always a huge fan of high conflict games because they can be mean sometimes. I think it's a lot easier to just be doing your own thing, and maybe there's some player interaction. But if you really kind of have to go, mano a mano and take that on people and do mean things, not every kind of gamer likes that. And it can be tough to do something to another player that is highly combative and mean, especially if the player has misgivings about that style of gameplay. Cosmic Frog is just so weird and kind of insane, balls to the wall craziness that it doesn't bother me that there's that kind of interactivity in this game. The game itself is kind of just so crazy, I'm going to go wherever it takes me. And if that means playing a cosmic frog, kicking other frogs across 6 different dimensions, swallowing the lands that they regurgitate, I'm in for it. I mean, this game is probably unlike any game that you've ever played before, at least in some way. I mean, it is such a unique game. I can't think of any other game like it at all. And it just has crazy funky art. It has a pretty cool rule set that, has some similarities to other games sometimes. But just the mechanics and the idea behind it and the theming are just crazy. Very, very cool, very enjoyable. This is the kind of game I think you want to have in your collection because you are going to be able to pull this out and show it to players and you will blow their minds with it. And you will always have some kind of game experience, I think, playing this with new players that will make for good remembrances. You're not going to have a forgettable generic gaming experience with this game. It's just, it won't let you do it. It's too bizarre a game. So this is an awesome game. I really can't wait to play this one again, and I think this might be a game that I just kind of take with me to a lot of meetups whenever those start happening again, because I want to see a lot of people playing this and the reactions to it. And also it's a game that I've seen William Brown, the Hungry Gamer, talking about this, but I still think that Cosmic Frog has largely slid under the radar and not that many people are talking about it and playing it. And for a game this good and this unique and this weird and this fun, more people need to be aware of this and more people need to be playing it. It's a really great game. So if, like me, I kind of passed you by last year during this pandemic, it wasn't on Kickstarter, it's a retail game, think about going out and trying to get it now because it's really, really good. You should at least play it at some point. Get one of your friends to get it. It's an experience unlike most other board games, and it's something that I think you deserve to have at least once. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Embarcadero. This is the game of the month. This is a great game. I backed this one on Kickstarter. I tend to talk more loosely about these games in this video, in the Games of the Month video, so I don't do a lot of stuff on the screen. But off the top of my head, I don't know what games these two designers have done before. So I will look, and in the editing process, I will list the other games that they have designed before, because this is a really solid game. And it's a good economic game. It's got a lot of good decision making, and the theme and everything is just so unique and weird. Not quite as weird as Cosmic Frog, but weird. And it's a great game. So let me try to describe this to you. But it looked cool to me in the Kickstarter, and which is obviously why I backed it. But it's one of those games, when it delivered, it definitely fulfilled all of my hope for it, and in some cases may have exceeded it. It may have exceeded it just by kind of delivering on the experience of my greatest hopes, because that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get a Kickstarter and the game that you hope would be there is there somewhat, but it's still maybe not all that you had hoped. And so maybe you see like, oh, this game could have been this, but it did that, and it missed it a little bit. this is great. Okay, so the design on this, I really like. I think it's a very smart design. The art is gorgeous. It comes with these little plastic pieces that you're going to be stacking up, kind of building little buildings on wharves. The components all look really good, and I just think it's a great overall package. I'd really recommend this for a lot of people to go out and maybe grab the retail version. But let me talk about the game and we'll see if it's something you're actually going to like. Also, you will see a first impressions on Embarcadero very soon from me. I'll probably be working on it this weekend. I may even get it published this weekend. So just know that there's more Embarcadero coming, and you'll be able to hear more of my thoughts on it and see the game, and that is in the pipeline and coming very soon. But let's just talk about it a little bit here first. Okay, so I like the design, I like the art, I like the components, I think it's a great package. What is it about and how does it play? Okay, so first of all, it's set in San Francisco, and it's set there kind of turn of the century. And this was a time when you'd have ships kind of coming into the San Francisco Bay. They would have goods on them, and sometimes those ships would kind of be near the end of their life. And so they would actually run the ships aground, and they would use those old ships to build buildings in the San Francisco Bay. So if you look at that harbor, it's actually got buildings on it that were cobbled together from old ships. And you'll see like very weird businesses that kind of, they look like boats turned into businesses. And it's just a very, very fascinating historical detail, something that I didn't know, and I was just really intrigued by when I saw this Kickstarter campaign. And sure enough, it is based on a real thing happening. So in this game, you are bringing ships into the harbor in San Francisco Bay, and you're going to have these multi-use cards. And you'll be doing kind of a draft at the beginning of the game. You'll get some of these cards into your hand, and then as the round goes on, you'll be using these cards. And every time you play a card, you'll pick up another card. You may have to buy it, but you'll somehow acquire another card into your hand, and then you will need to choose which of the cards in your hand, maybe something you already had, or maybe something you just picked up, you're going to set aside for the next round. So every round, you're dealing with choices of, do I want to use these cards in my hand right now? Do I want to move them to the next round's hand and maybe try to use some of the cards that I'm picking up? And then the cool thing is that each of these cards can be used to do 3 different things. So one of them is a scrap action, where you can essentially just kind of discard the card and there'll be resources on it and you can collect those resources. That actually represents the way those ships were scuttled and used for their resources. Now you're also going to have ship cards and building cards. So if you play a ship card, you're essentially bringing that ship into the harbor with certain resources on it. And as you play these ship cards, you'll accumulate resources. Then when you play the building cards, you'll actually be creating buildings, but you'll need to have those resources from the ships to build the buildings. And there'll be different things that you do in the game which will allow you to place these little plastic pieces out on the wharfs. And there's different scoring things depending on how you place them. Placing them next to another player's structure will allow you to advance along a track that will give you bonuses. You'll be able to actually extend the wharves themselves. And then between every round, there'll be certain scorings. Some of those scorings will be based on how far you are on that track. Some of those scorings will be based on kind of where your buildings are positioned and who has area majority on the different wharfs. And then players will score points for how long those wharves are. So if you have a wharf where you have a lot of the structures, kind of adjacent to the wharf, you're going to want to try to extend that wharf because you will get points between rounds for how long the wharf is. But when you're using those building cards and you're constructing a building, you're going to need to already have your structures placed in such a way that you can then say, okay, this building is 6 units. I have these 6 units in a group. I'm going to kind of put a roof on all 6 of these structures, and that will be this hotel that I've just built. So you're kind of always playing a game when you're placing those structures in terms of what you want to try to build, and you're going to want to group them in a certain way to facilitate that. So there's just a very, very nice chunky engine building system going on with these different cards and how you're placing the structures, how you're building buildings. And then some cards will even have a little bonus on it where if you have the extra resources listed on that card, not only do you get to build that building, but you will get to place structures on every part of the roof. So that will get you a lot of structures that you can then use to build the next building. And when you can take those kinds of bonuses and give yourself a leg up on the next build, it's very, very, very helpful. It just has a lot of really good decision making in it. I like the different way you're trying to use cards for their powers, or to bring in ships, or to build buildings, or to scuttle things for goods. And I like the process of trying to decide which cards you're playing for this round and which cards you're setting aside for the following round. And then in the final round of the game, the third round, the cards that you set aside will score you endgame points. There are also endgame points for the different buildings that you've created, and a lot of times there are scoring rules that go along with that allow you to score more points if you've done certain other things. It's both a really good economic game and a sort of area control game. But a lot of area control games are very simple in what they do. Players are essentially just trying to compete for a space or a land. A lot of games, dudes on a map games, you're literally just trying to get an invading force in there and then hold a region. And you do that across enough regions and you've won the game. Now this has area control to it, but it's not quite that simple. There's a process to how you place your structures and build structures and whether or not to extend wharves and which of the wharves you're going to be concentrating on, which of the wharves you're maybe going to let go because you can't win everything, whether you want to kind of focus on that track. And the decision-making process in here is pretty chunky. It's not a Vital Lacerda game or something like that, but it's got a lot of really, really good decisions to be made. And I think I'd probably put it in the medium-heavy range because those decisions can compound, and there needs to be some kind of intelligent thinking going along. The game looks good enough and there's really good ideas there that I think it may appeal to some players who like medium-light games. And so while I'm saying it's not going to get super, super heavy, it is chunky and it's probably on that medium heavy level and it's got some chunky decision making processes to it. Yet at the same time, you really are kind of dealing with 5 played cards each round, and so there are things to kind of cap the AP and not allow the decision making process in your mind to run too far away because there are kind of rails on it because of the card limit for every round. This is just such a good game. It's great. It really is great. I'm sure I'll mention this again in my first impressions video, but for right now, this game is, I think, 5th on my best of 2021 list. The top game being Sleeping Gods, followed by Kanban EV, followed by Dice Throne Adventures, followed by Excavation Earth, and then Embarcadero. That's some pretty good company right there. And it's not a game where it's the 5th best game of the year, and it's not that great, and I think it's going to go down. It is solidly in there at spot number 5. And I think as more and more games, come out over the rest of the year, it won't necessarily be easy for those games to dethrone Embarcadero in its number 5 spot. It's a good game, a really good game, and it's going to take a lot for any game to kind of get above that. And the 4 games that I currently have sitting above that, those are all amazing games in my opinion. So Embarcadero is my game of the month. Be looking for the first impressions video coming very soon. I'll be giving you a look at the game. I'll talk more about it. Also be looking for my August game of the month video coming in about 2 weeks, about halfway through September. And I already know all the games that are on there. I could make it right now. I could shoot that video right now. I'm just not doing it because I'm going to give you guys a little more time to think about some of these games, and then I'll kind of put it in there in the halfway point between this and between the September video, which I'll publish in the beginning of October. And if you haven't played it yet, you really might want to consider giving this one a try with a friend who has it, or even consider picking it up. I think it's worth a blind buy. I think it's that good. I think it's really, really good. And if you like good economic games with some area control, just solid decision making, pretty crunchy, that aren't going to run all day. And I think you can still get this played in a couple hours with a full player count and people know what they're doing. It gives you that satisfying, crunchy experience without a game that's kind of enormous on the table or it's going to run for hours and hours and hours. It's very, very well designed in how they've pared that gaming experience down, giving you just the kind of components and cards that you need, and still giving you a really, really good, rich game experience. I think right now I'm rating this one at a 9.0, but if you want to know for sure, come back for the first impressions video and you will find out. Also, be on the lookout for a Shawson first impressions video, which I'm going to be shooting today, and tomorrow's Kickstarter Weekly, which is going to be very, very short, as well as a first impressions video for Embarcadero and one for Kemet Blood and Sand. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.